So regarding the question about students who have been studying in Madrasah for multiple years, memorizing Quran or doing their Deen studies, how would you advise a student who's leaving Madrasah and now coming into the field of academics, namely going to high school or junior high school?
First and foremost, I think it's so important for a lot of our Islamic schools to really try to have teachers who have studied, especially traditional, right? Because it gives you a foundation. But for those individuals who have now come, especially if you've gone overseas for some time, what happens is you're learning, but you're also sometimes, you haven't seen the culture or the climate of what's happening with the kids who you're going to be now teaching. So one of the first things I want everyone to understand, especially future teachers who are scholars, is that you know your content. The idea is to really look at the context, right? It's really, can you now take that information you know, look at what they are going through, apply it, and give them the right advice for that moment at that time. So that by itself is, really, so one part is speaking to your local community youth activists or social workers, the counselors, the educators, to kind of get an idea of what the culture is of even that city, that community, right? Because even in the United States, you might have certain communities that have different situations, right? And I think that by itself becomes one. So it's kind of getting some background knowledge. Then after getting the background knowledge, is the second thing is to now look at it and say, all right, now that we know what's going on, is that when a situation or a topic is, how do you make that connection to that age group? So because middle school is different than high school, right? Because they're still young, but they're still growing. They think they're independent. They want to be cool. But still that kind of discussion at middle school, some things maybe you don't want to bring up because they may be not really exposed to it. And sometimes we'll go and Google it and find out. To high school, you'll say, hey, look, it's going to be out there. Let's go ahead and have these conversations. So then the two is information, culture, age group. The third is after you get the age group, then you want to go ahead and say, okay, how do I disseminate it for them to understand it? Because now the question becomes, all right, is it going to be a lecture format? Because many of the students were, it was like when the Shaykh was there, right? Yeah. And many ulama who became teachers, they said, man, this is a humbling experience. Because most of them, they speak a lecture once a week. Everyone's like, whatever, Shaykh. They're all listening, taking notes, adab, akhlaq, shaking hands. So now they're just like, things are going well. Yeah. So then the problem becomes and saying, well, I know this is how it's been, but now you have to do this not once a week. For 180 days of school, Monday through Friday, different things where some kids are like, what? Now you can't just give a lecture. You're gonna have to say, how do you keep them engaged? How do you keep them motivated? How do you make it connecting so they want some more? So that by itself becomes another topic or a strategy that they have to go ahead and look at. Yes. And then the last thing I think it's so important is when you're teaching is to also realize when you're having that, because it's 180 days, is to have that classroom management.
Yes, right? Absolutely.
The consistency in following through, because now it's not just a lecture and coming out. So one becomes instructional methods of it, then the classroom methods of it. And then the other aspect is because back then, it's mostly you study, madrasah, you just have a final exam and you get your, ijazah, so on and so forth. Here, you might have to have consistent exams or quizzes or tests. So just being organized. Yes. Right? Just to be like, okay, how do we get organized, getting the grades in and kind of putting those processes in, and then communicating with parents, and not be like, well, I'm the Shaykh, but now there might be a question like, well, my child said this, right? That becomes that. Now you yourself maybe have taught Islamic studies, so you might have kind of noticed those. So those are some these basic kind of things I feel like it's so important for religious teachers who are coming into this field and realize. But then I always tell them, like, hey, there's going to be challenges, but that's the sunnah of Allah. All the prophets didn't have it. He's like, oh, we believe. It took 5, 10, 20 years. So I'm like, even if some kids do know, and sometimes you're like, I can't believe this parents, I know this kid in the community. Why is there, their parents in the community, and this kid is so crazy. Or not to say crazy, but just, just have a lot of energy. But that's where you're going to say, well, what, this is what it is. And then inshallah, just like as scholars, and when you tell people to be patient, like you will get rewarded for your patience in dealing with this kid for this long.
Absolutely, yeah.
So I think those were kind of, some thought processes.
Yeah, and a couple of things from my end, because I've lived this.
Yes.
Number one, I want to advise new teachers who are scholars in particular that it's okay to be someone who seeks help. Scholars are supposed to be, at least in their realm, the top of the totem pole. And what happens is it's hard to ask for advice, but if you're going to get into this field, find a mentor and shadow that mentor. Identify what works for that teacher, how that teacher is able to manage the classroom, manage their time, manage all of the various responsibilities that comes with teaching. Remember, teaching is no longer just relaying information. It's taking attendance, it's lesson planning, it's giving assessments on a regular basis, returning those assessments back in a timely manner. So find a mentor, shadow that mentor. Number two, what I will also advise is if you've left for a period of time, the city, the community, the age that you're returning to is not the same age from which you left. So even if you've only left for 1 or 2 years and you've come back, recognize that those 2 years, social media has grown, technology has changed, children have changed. And so you may be expecting A, but you're not going to get A. You won't even get B or C. You're going to get D or E because times have changed so much in a short period of time. The last thing I would recommend is that when teachers come to teach, it's very important to recognize that these students don't see you as a scholar, because many students don't understand what a scholar is. But they're really willing to take you as a teacher, as a friend, as a role model, so long as you're able to address them at a level that they can understand. And Madrasah, everyone is given respect no matter what. But in Islamic schools, or any school for that matter, you have to earn it. And don't come expecting, come giving, and in return you'll get something from those students. So inshallah, I think we have a few more questions. We'll get into those inshallah.